I was clinging to OCD in this weird way of like, it was protecting me, but it was ruining my life. It was so twisted.
Yeah.
But I lived a long time letting this thing destroy me. And so I'm going to use, we live in an age where I have access to stuff. I'm going to use everything at my disposal.
Welcome to Please Excuse My OCD. My name is Tyler, and I am your host here. We have Justin, who runs the OCD blog on Instagram, and he's been kind enough to lend us his time to talk about his story, the amazing artwork that he makes on Instagram daily, and what that means, and how that helps him connect with others who have OCD, and vice versa. So I have a few questions I want to ask Justin and get to know a little bit about his story. As always, we are not professional therapists, clinicians. We are just two people who have OCD who are talking about our experiences. As always, if you are struggling, please seek advice from a mental health professional. Thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I've followed you for a minute. You're actually one of the first, I guess, OCD accounts, I guess you could say, that I started following. And you and I have chatted about this before, but I waited to get into the community, and then the minute I did, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. So
Yeah.
glad I joined and glad we got to connect.
Awesome. Thanks, man. No, I think that's wonderful, because when we get this sense of community through the things that we're creating and meeting people like this. I mean, I talk about social media all the time being like a catalyst for growth within myself, just because people like yourself, people in the OCD community, are so tethered, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because we all understand, what it is to have this. And so it's a pretty strong community. So I'm glad you started your account and have been sharing your art. And that's incredible, man. So can you just tell the listeners here, people who haven't heard of the OCD blog, really your story, like the Spark Notes version of like who you are and where you come from and your relationship with OCD?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, the kind of elevator pitch, if you will, is just I have been blessed with an awesome life. And so I kind of like to use my story as like a litmus test for other people, because I've had some, very difficult things. I've had friends pass away and family members. Like I don't want to negate the fact that I have had a hard life, but I've also had really supportive parents. And, we were at a place where I was able to get diagnosed at 18, which I'm finding now in the community is pretty early. So I
Mm-hmm.
was very fortunate with that. I was able, had an older sister and a younger sister who actually, I kid with them all the time. They got to be the guinea pigs, but they got a medication before I did. And so I,
Wow.
I realized I got to see in real time that, it didn't dampen their personalities. Medication, I had built it up in my mind. And it was different than what I had thought. And I'm on it now, and everyone's different. I'm not necessarily advocating one way or the other, but I was just hyper resistant because of, just ego stuff. And we can get
Mm-hmm.
into it later. But
Sure.
yeah, I've been very blessed. And so I tell a lot of people, like, I can't imagine, had my parents passed away growing up and I was put in, a foster home or something. Like, I can't imagine dealing with OCD on top of really life
Mm-hmm.
warping things. And so I was blessed with friends and a close family, but even the purest of my relationships that should have been just so easy, walk in the park. I ripped myself apart. I convinced people hated me. You have OCD, so I don't have to explain this, but I convinced myself I could uh, kind of know who didn't like me. So I would stop myself from forming relationships before they ever even happened. And then
Yep.
eventually contamination took over, and POCD and ROCD, just all these different things came crashing in. And there wasn't this major moment I could point to. I wasn't like, I was kicked out of my house or something. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of use that as an example of like, I should not have had OCD wreck me the way it did. And it did. It just absolutely invaded my entire life. And it created problems where there weren't any. And so I really feel for people who I've had people follow me. There's a kid in another country who was just being honest, and he was like, "I have absolutely no way to get," because I posted about medication. He said, "I have
Hmm.
absolutely no way to get this. Absolutely no way. I can't get a therapist. I can't, like, all of this is off the table." And we had a good conversation. I was honest. I was like, "I'm not a clinician. I can't. There's nothing I can necessarily provide other than my absolute, like, deepest condolences, because I
Yeah.
have been blessed and I know what OCD did to me. So I cannot imagine having to just, here we go, no
Hmm.
therapy, no medic, no, not even an outlet. Let's, life's got to move on. So yeah,
Wow.
that's my short pitch of, I don't have this crazy epiphany moment. OCD just slowly took over my life and, almost made me drop out of school and stuff like that. But yeah, I've been very blessed. So I love hearing people in the community from all walks of life, and how it's affected them, both good and bad. I love hearing recovery stories, but also just hearing how OCD can ruin
Hmm.
the purest of existences. It can just, I mean, this. I don't have to tell you this, but
Yeah.
it's a hell of a disorder. It really
Yep.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. You're so right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's something that I hear you telling about, you telling me about your life with you had a blessed life and everything is really normal for the most part, and I can relate to that really really heavily on some instance too. I really think it's important to acknowledge that OCD really doesn't discriminate. I mean, you could be the wealthiest person in the world, have all the relationships you want,
Hmm.
really have the book checked off in each category and still suffer from OCD or anything
Yeah.
of that matter. But so that's something that I think really brings a lot of us together too, is the fact that like OCD, for somebody who has had so much trauma in their life, OCD for someone who hasn't, you're still dealing with this thing, so to speak, that has full grasp on you and continues to evolve the more that you feed into it, which most of the time we don't even know we're doing. So, um, and I really, commend you too for talking to that individual. I can't imagine not having access to therapy and medication with OCD. I can't even begin to fathom like where I would turn personally.
Yeah.
But I think this community, hopefully this person can find solace in this community. And even though like social media and podcasts and things like this should not take place of therapy,
Yep.
these things that we're talking about here are things that, I don't know, maybe if you had heard or I heard this as a kid with OCD, it maybe would have been a little bit less harsh and isolating
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I will say, I'm not even gonna rattle off names, because there's about 10 or 12 who, honestly,
Hmm.
uh, we could link them at some point, because they're great resources. But
Yeah.
I've noticed we follow some of the same clinicians, so I've been able to actually throw their names in the mix for
Yep.
people, because it's obvious when you go to my account, but I also just make sure people understand I'm not a clinician, so none of this is
Right.
advice. It's art, but I will throw a few names of clinicians I follow who post really great reels. I know
Hmm.
TikTok and Instagram reels can be addictive and they can be really bad for mental health, but there's some
Yeah.
very cool content, some very cool, uh, not just OCD content, but mental health content in general. It's being put out by real professionals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's crazy, the when you go and look up some of these people. I'm like, I don't know what marketing person convinced them to sit down and make this video, but
Hmm.
it's been very cool to see, not just the artistic content, but the really informative stuff that, to me,
Yeah.
again, shouldn't replace therapy, but it's been very helpful. There's been some information shared that I've been blown away by.
1000% agree. And I say the same thing to people. Hey, we're not clinicians. At least I'm not a clinician either, but
Yeah.
like what we're doing is sharing our experience. And I think in a way, these clinicians and people who are really professionals in the whole OCD community, a lot of them have OCD themselves and have struggled with OCD in the past. And so it makes their creative side of being able to relate to people like us better, because they
Mhm.
understand like those little memes that only people with OCD
Yeah.
will understand.
Yeah.
It's incredible, some of the stuff that they come up with, because I'm like, damn, like I wish I came up with that, and the
Hmm.
fact that someone else did, I'm glad it's out there, because it's so true. I wanted to touch upon the medication that you were talking about, the medication comment, because I can relate to that. Growing up with the stigma of like, oh no, medicine's going to change who I am. It's going to like stunt my creativity. Like, why, like, do I give up who I am, in order to like feel normal, or like, what am
Hmm.
I supposed to do? And you said that your sisters kind of paved the road for you in terms of like
Yeah.
themselves being on medication. Like, how was that process for you?
Well, it was interesting because I know genetics can play or do play a huge part in it. And so my younger sister's actually adopted from Hunan province, China. And so we're all 4 years apart, but it was interesting because they both went on medication. And obviously, she's my sister, but there's a genetic component that separates us there. And so it was so interesting to see her personality is so different from my older sisters, but it was unaffected. And I think that was the biggest thing that was keeping me from ever starting medication,
Mm-hmm.
was in this weird twisted way. Like I guess it's not twisted, but I felt twisted at the time of, although I felt like my mind was torturing me, I still loved my mind. I didn't want to change it. It was weird. I really
Yeah.
wanted to change, but I didn't want to change it. I don't know. You have OCD, and anyone listening, I'm sure, can
Mm-hmm.
relate. You're in this weird state where OCD has you pinned of like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
clinging to this comfort and I don't want anything to change. But I also know there's aspects of my personality that like have
Yeah.
to go, right?
Yeah.
Um, but watching them, both being my sisters, but also there were different genetics at play, their personalities were untouched, and if anything, made they were more loving, kinder to people around them. It just kind of stripped this veil, that anyone that's had OCD knows kind of puts over you, where when you're in the throes of it, you don't realize it, but you're just very isolated and focused on yourself and your little world. It's just so hard to break out, and no
Yeah.
amount of morning meditation, like it'll
Right.
trap you. So I watched that and started to realize that I was clinging to OCD in this weird way of like, it was protecting me, but it was ruining my life. It was so twisted.
Yeah.
But I I eventually was like, okay, if it's not going to affect my personality, I've read a million studies and meta analysis. Like, I don't know much, but I'm looking to people that know a lot. Why am I not doing this other than this deep sinking feeling from a couple comments I heard 5, 10 years ago about
Yep.
you're weak. We can get into conversations about men and medication, but there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
I guess the term is the toxic masculinity. There's a lot of stuff that prevents a lot of men from feeling like they should get that help, and so
Yep.
eventually I just realized this is stupid. Why am I not? I'm literally I'm just it's the cutting off your nose to spite your face, and so I
Yeah.
started it. And I was like, you know what? No one's forcing me to do this. I can stop at any moment. So I was like, I'm going to try. Started with fluoxetine, Prozac,
Yep.
20 milligram, and then 40, and then just eased into it. And it pretty soon became clear again. In no way is this a recommendation. Everyone's different. I know people who've started it, their suicide ideation got so bad they just stopped.
Yep.
Mine was bad, but I kind of got over this threshold and eventually became better. And so I am a lot of people probably shouldn't be on it, but some people that aren't on it definitely should, and I was one of them.
Yeah.
And it became very clear. I was like, you know what? I can't say I'm going to be on this for the rest of my life, but for a few years while I'm sorting through my OCD, I'm going to use this, and it's dumb not to.
Yeah.
So now I'm on it. I take it every day, and I don't know. I see stuff online about some people come off or lower dosages as they get older and what. I'll kind of figure that out with um, my doctor. But for now, I'm like, I lived a long time just letting this thing destroy me. And so I'm going to we live in an age where I have access to stuff. I'm going to use everything at my disposal. So
Yeah.
again, not a recommendation, but if anyone's listening that has that kind of stigma buried in them, I took a long time for me to rattle it, but just take some time, go on a drive or something, and just ask yourself what's stopping you from, even if it's not medication, even if it's just going to talk to a therapist, what's
Yeah.
stopping you from getting help. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's so true. I mean, that's such a good piece of advice because a lot of it comes down to awareness in yourself, which is
Yep.
sometimes very hard for OCD. I mean, we doubt pretty much, we can doubt anything and
Yeah.
everything when it comes to OCD. So that self awareness of like, well, what's the reason that I'm not starting this? And a lot of it does come down to the fear of the unknown because
Yep.
it's hard to really see how it's going to affect you until you start taking it.
Yeah.
And I like that you said you got over that hump of like the suicidal ideation feeling because when I first got on Paxil, I was on paroxetine for like I don't even know 4 or 5 years, and I switched to venlafaxine. But when I first got on Paxil and I went up the first, like I was on 10, like which is like
Yeah.
nothing, and then I went up to
Yeah. Yeah.
20. That jump, like I was like, oh my god, like I have this like feeling like I'm crawling out of my skin, and
Yeah.
I'm afraid I'm gonna hurt someone. I feel like I'm gonna hurt myself. Like I was having all these feelings and thoughts I've never had before, and I hate to use the word crazy, but like at the time, that's how it
Yeah.
felt, and
Yeah.
the doctor was like, this is kind of the initial like shock almost to your
Hmm.
brain. Let's see if we can like ride this out for another week. And I was like, dude, no, you want me to
What?
wait another week?
Yeah.
Like I was terrified that I wasn't going to make it another week. So
Yep.
I know how hard that is, man. So like I like that you said you made it over that hump, and then now you're at a place because a lot of people may hear this and be like, "What do you mean I need to like tough through that?"
Yeah.
And of course you said it's different for everybody, but there is kind of a segment stage I feel like for a lot of people where it hits their brain and their brain is like, what is this, what's going
Yeah.
on?
Just
So
freaks out your system.
yeah, pretty much. So I like that you said that. And so how old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?
I actually turned 25 on Friday.
Congratulations, man, happy
Yeah.
birthday.
Thank you.
25 as an age, can be startling for a lot of people. Do you have any feelings about turning like 25? Is there any, you know,
So I'm actually at a interesting place because I'm married and my wife and I found out we're having a baby boy in November. And so yeah,
congratulations.
thank you. I appreciate it. And it's funny, we joke with our friends and family. We got married a year and a half ago. We were planning on starting a family. We both come from big families, very close knit. We were planning on starting a family, but we had like a 3 year window. And we were joking with our friends and family. Like, this was like the first month of the 3 year window. So it's definitely sooner than we wanted, but I'll be honest, now that we've gone through the ultrasounds and like
Yeah,
every parent says this, but once it happens, like it's all over. We're so excited.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so my advice is different only because I know a lot of 25-year-olds, especially in our generation, are not only single but rightfully so actively resisting long-term relationships until they kind of sort through their own stuff.
Sure.
um, everyone's I think the pandemic made a lot of people look at mental health differently.
Yep.
um, but I will say, my first of all, my advice would be you never know what's going to happen. I was actually bartending here in Nashville,
Hmm.
and I had gotten out of a relationship, and I was telling the other bartenders, as I as we're bartending, if I get any numbers, I'm actually going to pursue it just because I'm not trying to be in a long term relationship. I'm absolutely
Yep.
like at least once a shift, I would be like, I'm so glad I'm single. I'm out here. I'm working on me. I'm figuring out. We were all super honest with each other, so I was like, I'm figuring out my anxiety, my OCD. I'm like getting kind of healing the inner child, getting back into art and music and all this stuff. And I
Yeah.
was swearing up and down, there's no chance. I told him there's no chance I start looking until I'm 30, and I will be damned if I'm married before 35. That was my whole shtick.
Wow.
Anyways, I was on Hinge and not looking for a long term relationship, and ended up. You would think I would meet her bartending, but I actually met her through Hinge, and then we had a great first date, and then she visited me the next night, and so she would kind of come, and I would make her drinks, and so
Yeah.
that's how we really got to know each other. Um, but yeah, everything happened fast, and we ended up getting engaged, and then married the next year, and now we have a kid on the way. So my advice is just, you never know what's going to happen.
Yep.
You never know what's going to happen. And also, I think especially for the OCD community where we tend to doubt, if you know something's not right, then you know it's not right. But at the same time, I spent a lot of time having conversations with friends and family, and it took a long time for me to kind of realize I did want to get married to this person, but um, initially her and I have talked about this. We almost broke up because in our conversations we realized that we were looking at our friends and realizing if any of them were doing what we were doing, we would call them crazy.
Yeah.
And I had conversations with her about my OCD and how it was making me feel like I am not putting enough thought into this. So my OCD convinced me I need to think about this all day and night, and so that's what I did for about a year. But there came a point where I was talking with my therapist and I started to realize that she made me a better person. She made me happier. I was a fuller version of myself. And this weird relationship that I had with OCD, where for so long I second guessed my college choice, or I didn't think much about my major. I was applying the wrong thought to the wrong things. And so
Yep.
I was, I mean, I don't think I spent more than 5 minutes thinking about my college major, but I spent hours obsessing about which door of the exam hall I would enter
Yep.
so that I could get a good grade. And it was, I mean, I sorry to use this word. It was for me psychotic. I was
Mm-hmm.
studying so hard; it made no sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started doing that with this relationship where I knew that this was going to be the rest of my life, and I knew that this was the right person for me. I had again, I was bartending. I'd had a great time being single. We had both dated other people. This was not
Sure.
our first rodeo by any means, and so
Yeah.
it became this thing where my OCD was stopping me. My recovery from
Mm-hmm.
OCD was now getting in the way of just living life. And so I guess my main advice would be just take time to figure out what is you and what is your OCD. And I know that that might be somewhat controversial, only because it's the most difficult facet of OCD is figuring out which is which.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I think sometimes, I'll be honest, I think people with OCD, we get scared of exploring our own minds. We get
Yes.
really scared. And I get it. It's terrifying. It is
Yep.
terrifying what your brain can come up with obsessive compulsive disorder of
Yeah.
any subtype. Um, for me, that relationship obsession of convincing myself that either something is right when it's not, or it's not right when it is. And again, it took a lot of sifting through my own mind and talking with my therapist. And again, very grateful to be on medication. But it became clear that this was my future wife. This was the thing for me. But because for so long I felt I can't take a single step until I've analyzed every possible thing that could go wrong. And so I can't get married yet because I haven't thought of every permutation. I've gone through the first 5 years, but you're going to need to give me a couple more years of dating while I go through every single possible scenario of what could go wrong. It just, I don't know. Listen
There's no
to,
winning.
there's no winning. Try your best to sort through what's OCD and what's not. It becomes obvious if you spend enough time kind of
Mhm.
where you're tripping up, where the OCD is tripping you up.
I do love that you brought up that very personal experience that you've had and that you've walked through or even crawled through. And one of the most profound things you said was, I didn't spend 5 minutes deciding like which major I should be
Yeah.
working on. I'd spent like hours deciding which door to walk through for my
Yep.
exam. I get it. I mean, that is such a real OCD statement. And it just goes to show you that these these thought patterns, the intrusive thoughts, the places that we follow them to, sometimes have no logic at all. They have no underlying meaning. They could be the way we're perceiving them. Sometimes they are just attacking things that we really do value. So sometimes you get one side of the spectrum, the
Yeah.
other side it means absolutely nothing. So the fact that you were able to realize that and kind of dissect and say, well, wait a second, why is that how my brain works? And also, why am I giving this so much of my doubt and attention when really, like, I already know on a deep level, what I want from this relationship. That awareness, I know it's hard to curate that. It's hard to like get over that hump when you have OCD, but the fact that you're able to do that, especially with our OCD, is impressive. Very impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate it. It, the biggest issue with OCD is what's me and what's OCD. And so I feel like sometimes when, whether it's you and me or myself and family members, whatever, whenever I'm having this conversation with people who kind of understand the plight of OCD, it's this total catch 22 of like, you can't be scared of, part of recovery is learning to not be scared of your own mind. And we all deserve, in my opinion, and also I think most people in our community's opinion, you deserve a life where you're not tormented by your own mind. Like that's just, I think a lot
Yeah,
of people who have OCD, you convince yourself you somehow deserve it, or this sick
sure.
relationship with it. So yeah, it's weird advice to give of like, well, really spend time looking inwards. Like, no, that's the opposite.
Hmm.
But in a weird way, you eventually have to do that. I'm not saying that, in the throes of OCD, really go deep. No, there's times where I look back and I'm upset with myself for going back to the same thought over and over. There's sometimes when you can't choose, but there have been times in my life where I have chosen, unfortunately. I've
Yeah,
had this weird relationship. I've wanted to go back and wanted to feel stress because it gave me control of I get to plan my own stress and stuff.
sure,
So
sure.
yeah, it's weird advice to give, but just explore your own mind in the best way you know how. Again, under the guise of
Yeah.
a therapist, make sure that you're being smart. I would never say, "Hey, if you have OCD, go sit
Yeah.
alone in a room and just let your mind run wild." Like, no, absolutely not. But
Right.
there is an element of you're eventually gonna have to face
Yeah.
what's going on up there
Yeah.
if you ever want to have a full life.
Yeah.
So
That's really like jumping off into ERP. And I've
yeah,
never done ERP with a professional. I tried it on my own and I never recommend that ever. I
okay,
was I was doing it without realizing that I was doing
okay.
it. I just
How
had that
so?
mentality where I was like, I have to face it. I have to do these things. But I was doing compulsions all the way through. So it wasn't the awareness
Okay,
of, oh, this is a compulsion. Like you're facing your fears, but you're also compulsing. You're also doing the things that make you feel comfortable, which is
right.
completely negates ERP. So, but I'm wondering from your perspective, like, have you ever been involved in ERP? Is it something you think about or?
Yeah, so I actually, when I was in college, I had a therapist that was trained, and so I personally have done ERP.
Mhm.
I know the community talks a lot about ICBT now, and
Yes.
looking back, I kind of, I I don't. I'm not saying this absolutely, but I kind of feel like we dipped into ICBT in terms of the way he had me process things. But yeah, ERP is something that I would A, recommend, but B, I want to hit on. Don't do it by yourself.
Yeah.
I definitely thought I was doing exposure therapy to myself when I was younger, just by quote unquote pushing through. But again, the compulsions were always there. So
Yes.
appreciate you saying that. That's huge because I know a lot
Yeah.
of people, again, especially with OCD, it makes you doubt, and so part of that is, oh, you don't really need help. Just do it yourself. Just do ERP yourself. You don't. You know what? You probably don't even have OCD. You're kind of being a baby. Like it just
It's it's so
it's
it's so
the
just yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's just very elusive. It
Yeah.
very is. It's so elusive, and that's why it's recommended and really planted in people's brains to
Yep.
work with a professional because of how elusive it can be. So,
Yeah.
um, with that being said, though, I want to ask you about the OCD blog and you starting it and really like the inspiration behind it, because I absolutely love creativity. I love branding. I love all of that stuff. And looking at your page and like what you do, the messages are incredible. How you connect with people in the community with OCD, incredible. I think everything that you're doing is extremely important from many different sides of the coin. And I would love to just know your process, like how that came about, really what you're up to and where you're going, because it's an incredible page.
Yeah. Appreciate the kind words. It really started in church and in school. I would have just horrible taboo thoughts. And you alluded to this earlier, but this, like, I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I wanted to get out of my own skin. And so I couldn't figure out how to explain how I was feeling. And so, especially, I got in trouble for talking a lot. Part of my
Mm-hmm.
OCD was I couldn't really stop myself from trying to share stuff. So I get in trouble with talking in class, talking in church,
Yep.
whatever. So I eventually was like, you know what? I need a different outlet or I'm going to get kicked out of
Yeah.
everywhere I go. I need to shut up. And so I started just doodling. And in school and in church, you'll know the programs and or worksheets are
Yep.
always centered, so you really only have the margins. And so I
Yep.
would do these like little I would have to do them tiny, these little sketches, and then I would just write stuff out. And it's funny, I stopped this. I'm sure true of a lot of people in the pandemic, but I lost that side of myself. Pandemic happened, sitting at home, flare-ups were going on. I was trying to figure everything out, and that kind of childlike instinct kicked back in because I was home, and we were all in our own little caves.
Yeah.
And so I started doing it, and I was like, oh, this is why I used to do this. This is a great outlet. And you're an artist, so whether it's music
Yeah.
or words, poetry, canvas painting, whatever.
Yep.
When it starts to really, you get into that flow state, the mind quiets. And for
Mhm.
OCD, that's gold. That's gold
Yes.
for anyone, but that's just pure
Yes.
gold for anyone with OCD. And so um, I ended up getting this little drawing pad called a Remarkable, and so you just sketch on it, and it kind of looks like a sheet of paper. They do a really good job. It's almost tinted like a Kindle, and then I just send that in either PNG or PDF form. And so I started
Wow.
doing that. And if you go way back on the blog, I think I have some old ones of I was just doing it on a sheet of paper and taking a photo. And then I invested in this and
Yep.
started drawing that. I think if you go far back enough, I don't think I've deleted them. I'll
I
go
gotta
check
find that.
after this. Yeah, I'll go check after this. But it was pretty crummy. Don't actually I take it back. Don't go look. They'll be deleted by the time it comes out.
Oh,
Um,
that's awesome.
but yeah, I started doing it and realized that I knew people had OCD and I knew people felt the way I felt, but it wasn't until starting the blog and getting comments, and not even comments, but just people engaging or sharing the post was kind of their way of being like, oh, someone else gets it. And I'm like, wait, you get
Hmm.
it too? It was this two-way street of us both realizing like, oh my gosh, I might be crazy, but I'm not as crazy as I thought. Like there's
Yeah.
aspects of this disorder that have really convinced me I'm on this island. And
Hmm.
everyone with OCD knows how isolating it can be, but that validation, obviously, you need it coupled with like actual personal growth and therapy and all that good stuff. But I will say a huge element of recovery was finding out other people were going through this and had gone through this and were now grown adults with kids or working
Hmm.
professionals or clinicians, whoever you are, the fact that they got through this or they're still going through this, it's just so validating. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's been awesome. But glad looking back, I'm not quite sure what made me turn to Instagram. I guess it's just the easiest photo sharing app, but
Yeah.
I didn't realize there was this amazing community. Obviously, that's how we found each other and a lot of other creators, but there's this whole network of OCD clinicians and creators that oftentimes, you know, collab and
Yeah.
interact. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you just said is very validating to hear because there's something about social media and connecting with people like you and connecting with people who have a story with OCD and share that story. That is so that is so healing
Yeah.
on a level that like therapy and everything else, while it's important, the level of connection with other people who have it is on a different level, and it definitely helps in being able to deal with it on your own because you're like, oh, Justin deals with it. I know Justin pulls through when X, Y, and Z happens. My buddy Sean doing ERPs every day down the highway when he's having panic attacks. Like,
Yeah.
they're doing it. You know what I mean? And why can't I do it? Like, I can
Yeah.
do it too.
Yeah.
So it's just this real time where we're all kind of healing, together in our own stories in real time, sharing that on social media. I mean, what a beautiful thing to be a
Yeah.
part of.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's really cool. And I encourage people not only to go to therapy and get connected with people who can provide real help, but there's this weird aspect of social media right now where it's like, I personally, and a lot of people, I'm sure you're the same, have had social media ruin their mental health.
Yeah,
But on the
absolutely.
same coin, I've been able to connect with people who I never would have been able to connect with, right?
Yep.
Whether it's the kid who's uh, DMing me in Thailand, or it's people in Seattle, or it's people in California, or it's someone here in Nashville who comments on like it's tough because I'm never going to recommend like, yeah, have more screen time.
Yeah.
No, don't do that. But I would say in moderation, plug
Mhm.
into that online community, and even if it's not OCD, I mean, if I had bipolar disorder, if I
Mhm.
was I follow a creator who has schizophrenia, and she posts amazing poetry.
Yep.
And I have a friend who has schizophrenia, and obviously I can't imagine what it's like. But in talking with him and in reading her posts, I'm like, this is
Yeah.
Scott. I mean, how amazing that someone on the other side of the world is writing poetry that a very small percentage of people who have ever lived would be able to really understand from the perspective of someone who's had
Yeah.
schizophrenia. I mean, there's something so cool about it. And so, yeah, I
Mhm.
agree with you. The community aspect of it, again, always be careful. You never want to seek reassurance through
Of
social
course.
media and comments, but
Mhm.
I think if it's like anything, everything in moderation. And so if you can find a way to plug into this online community, I mean, do it. It's so cool. And again, we're on this podcast because of the community we're
Right.
talking about. So
Right.
it happens in real situations, whether it's podcasts or
Yeah.
collaborating on art, or I've seen creators make songs together. Like it's just very cool to see what can happen.
It really
Kind of the
is.
good side of the internet, if you will, the good side of
Yes.
Instagram, if you will.
And I think that there are positives and negatives to everything. It just depends on what side you're looking at it from. This happens to be a positive, and so I noticed on your page too that you have like a book coming soon, right? That you've been getting your
Yeah,
drawings together and to really get all of, or at least a lot of your drawings in one place. Is it just going to be drawings, or is it going to be poetry with drawings? Is it going to be kind of both?
the preface of the book is it's supposed to be kind of a coffee table book
Mhm.
that you can write in. So the rough idea is, because the birth of the account and all these drawings and stuff were kind of childhood just drawings. I'm gonna have it set up where it's like a square kind of coffee table book, and then the center will be just one of my sketches, and then I haven't decided yet. Maybe on a little bit on the bottom, and then a few of them will be on the top too, but have slight captions with thoughts. And as the book goes along, some of them will turn into where I've written out poetry and stuff like that. A good example, also a book plug.
Mhm.
It's The Fox, the Horse, the Mole, and the Boy. Have you read that? Charlie
No,
McKinstry. Um,
I
I'll
gotta
send
check
you the
that
link
out.
after this, but very, very, very cool. I mean, I would just recommend it for any artists. It's a collection of drawings. There's this guy who's living in a cabin, and he started posting. I think he started posting on Instagram, maybe it was Twitter, but he started posting his drawings. People like put together a book, and all throughout the book, there's like ink blots of where his dog, like actually where his dog walked in from the outside and like spilled something, and there's like a coffee stain, from the mug all throughout. The idea being this is just how it came together, and so we're not going to edit it out, and so that's how they copied all the pages, and it's just very raw and very real. And so
Wow.
I'm going to try to set it up similar to that, just where it's the honest thoughts. Again, I'm not an expert, I'm not a professional, I'm just a human being that has lived with OCD, and it brought me very close to death. And now
Hmm.
that I'm thankfully on that kind of other side where I can look back and be glad that I've survived suicide attempts and stuff, I now realize that there's this, I don't know, it's not a duty, but there's this element of, now that I'm here, if I
Hmm.
could sell one copy of the book, if there's a, 18, 19-year-old kid who was like me and didn't really want to talk to anyone, but wasn't quite sure what was going on in his mind, if some of the drawings, even, I mean, you see my art, some of them are a little out there, but it's like, it helps explain really quickly at a quick glance, hopefully,
Yeah.
what I was going through or what I was thinking when I was drawing it. And a few of the drawings, it's been cool when people have reached out. I have one where it's, it's kind of a crude, most of them are pretty crude sketches, but it's just a kid. It's like a silhouette sitting he's sitting at the
Yeah.
bottom of essentially a hole, but it's cut out like they used to put prisoners in, where where
Yeah.
you're far below the earth with the grate on top,
Yep.
and he's etching out how long he's been there, and it's just how long till I get better. And I
I saw
that was
that.
after just that was after a tough day of work, and I was just like, I'm feeling like this now, but I've also felt like this in the past. And there's this
Hmm.
aspect of like, you keep feeling like you're done with the anxiety and the OCD. You'll have a week or two where like especially if you're taking the steps of therapy, medication. I've had time where I've kind of convinced myself that this will never affect me again. And then something small will happen that snowballs into something big, and I feel like I'm back at square one. It's like, am I ever going to get better, whatever. So I drew
Yep.
that and posted it, and it was just cool, the number of people that ended up reaching out privately and being like, this drawing is exactly how I'm feeling. Like, there's a lot of people around me. There's a lot of people physically, metaphorically, whatever, watching over me. Like, I have a lot of support, but I'm
Yeah.
so alone. I'm so
Yep.
alone, and I don't know, am I ever going to get better? And everyone around me is like, you'll get better. I don't think I'm ever going to get better. And again, it's just a quick drawing, but the idea, um, just being a messy collection of thoughts and sketches, and take what you can from it. And I'm even going to put in the preface of, just mark out parts you don't like and write your own thing. Like, this is
Yeah.
a communal effort. My page got started as this kind of just outlet, and the only reason I kept it going was because of other people. And I'm like, so do that with this book, mark it up, or don't buy the book, and just use the fact that people are publishing books about OCD and coming out of the woodwork. Talk to someone close to you that has OCD, or you have an inkling, or that they mentioned it a while back. It's a lot more
Yeah.
common than people realize. And so the more people who publish books like me and make music like you, I think, again, on top of therapy and all these great things, something so cool about people just no longer being scared. Because it's no secret, when I have
Yeah.
conversations with my dad and people from that generation, like that,
Mhm.
this would not have been done.
No. No.
Especially by a guy my age who's a working professional. Like, why in the world would I talk about my mental health in a book?
Hmm.
Like, why don't you publish your journal? Like, the idea just being so far out there, and yet just a few generations later,
Here
people
we
are
are.
people are coming out of the woodwork, and it's so cool.
I love that, man. I mean, I can't wait because I'm absolutely going to grab one. But just the idea of, hey, this is yours too. Go ahead and scribble what you actually feel, and if this inspires you, like, you're almost in a way reaching out for people to let them get into the flow state where it's like, hey, this is how I cope. Like,
Yeah.
here, go ahead, like, try it. And I think that's that's one, it's beautiful, but two, I think really the idea of, when you said earlier, you drew that vision of like writing on the wall, like, when will I ever get better? And people looking at that, immediately connecting with it from anywhere in the world and saying that I feel understood. That is a feeling that you can't buy. It's a feeling you can't try to sell. It's just something that is what we need as a community, and we're doing that. Like, we are the pioneers in a way, talking about OCD on social media within the past few years for
Yeah.
future generations to be able to cope in a better way. Funny how you said, "Oh, I feel like I'm back at square one." Like, I did an episode a few weeks ago about how when my dad was in the hospital last month, I felt like I was back at square one. You're fine, like you're going through life, everything's good, and then all of a sudden something big happens. It doesn't even have to be big, but something affects you to the
Yep.
point where you're like, "Oh, I'm having these thoughts, and I'm tapping the things I used to tap, and I'm doing
Hmm.
3 times here." And it's
Yep.
like, "Oh my God, like, where, like, is this ever going to go away?" And a lot of it's just the acceptance of like, "Hey, this is a chronic
Yep.
difference in brain,
Oh
and you're
yeah.
never back at square one." Like, now we do have people that we can talk to. We have much more information now than we did 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I love that you use the term back at square one, because I literally was just talking about that, because it can feel like it, but it really is not. You're never back at square one.
Yeah. No, I agree, and it's that the don't think of a purple elephant,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
going, life is going great, you're feeling confident, and then your dad gets put in the hospital, and it's
Yep.
not even that you're back at square one, it's that you did the compulsion, and then you
Yeah.
had the thought, I'm back at square one, and you're not back at square one, but it's like the purple elephant thing. The more I try to convince myself it's fine, your dad's just in the hospital, Tyler, it's fine,
Mhm.
you're not back at square one, you're just having a flare up, it doesn't matter. The logic and the
Right.
reasoning, that none of that matters. That all consuming doubt comes
Mhm.
over top, and it's over. And then even though you're not back at square one, it's like, well, if every fiber of your being feels like you are, you might as well be. And then it's frustrating
Right.
because it's like, well, what was all this work for? What was all this healing for? What was all, then it just,
Yep.
you feel like an idiot. I mean, there's so much. Yeah, there's so much
It's a
with it. And
cycle.
anyone that has, yeah, it's a cycle.
And you're not alone in that, man. I mean, there's so many people who feel those feelings. And I think, I mean, you said you're 25, you got diagnosed at 18.
Yeah.
And so you're already talking about it from a 7-year window. Did you have it, or at least like have tendencies prior to 18, or was it like around that time? Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was
Yeah.
my bread and butter, man. Like
Yeah.
I thought I had the world figured out. I was like, I don't. All I have to do is tap this and do this and whatever, and I will do great in sports. I'll do great in school. I'll do great. Like, it all just came crashing down when I realized there was no correlation, and I had OCD, and my anxiety was just keeping me trapped. And I mean, I think I always knew.
Mhm.
Um, Not even that I had OCD. I there were these feelings that I would tell my friends, like, I'll be walking through school and I'm feeling really, really good about a test, and I'll hit my arm on a door and we'll go all the way to class, and I know I'm going to fail the test if I don't go even it out. So I have to excuse myself to the restroom. I have to walk all the way across the school. I have to hit my left arm to
Mhm.
even out hitting my right arm. And the worst part about it is, like when a baseball player does all the, weird stuff
Yes.
and then hits a home run, I would go back and, I do okay on the test, and then the OCD swoops in and is like, "See? You
Told you.
need us." Yeah,
Yes.
told you.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was the part where, even when I didn't have the diagnosis, starting at 12 or 13, I started to look back at tendencies I had. And
Yep.
then I guess at 14 was when I first had the thought of like, I might have obsessive compulsive disorder, because I started to realize it's not all contamination.
Yep.
And once I figured that out, it was kind of game over. And then it was just this slow, I was resistant. It was an ego thing. I was like, no, I don't have that. No, you don't need anything. And
Yep.
then going off to college is when I was like, if I don't figure this out, I'm literally going to die. Like, we've got to figure this out. And that's when I got diagnosed and medication and stuff. But like a lot of people with OCD, I knew early on. I mean, some of my earliest memories, I remember thinking like, is everyone else doing this? Because
Yep.
this feels super time consuming. Like,
Yeah.
are pilots having to flick on and off the operator button 50 times so they don't crash the plane? Like, there's no
Yeah.
way everyone's doing this, you
Yeah.
know? There's
That
no
is
way.
so wild because literally, I feel like I'm listening to myself right now, dude. Like it's so, because you're right. There's one point where you're like, you're not sure if it's normal or not. And then it gets to a point where you're like, there's no way that people do this like every
Right.
day. Like it's interesting to see the gradual, movement of it really like taking hold in certain areas of your life. And I also find it interesting that you had the correlation between OCD and contamination. Whereas a lot of people, they just have this idea that it's, oh, I just like to have my room clean and tidy and this and that. It seems like there's so many different viewpoints for people who don't truly understand OCD, where they look at it as a certain thing. And for me growing up, I thought it was just cleaning. I thought it was just like, oh, my mom's so OCD because she's like, she loves the house clean. And here I
Yeah.
was touching the light flick 50 times with each finger before I left the room. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, it's pretty wild how something uh how we can have a viewpoint of OCD from a different stance, but really it's all encompassing. I mean, there's so many different forms of it, and it's all just it's all OCD. I'm glad though to hear that you didn't go a lifetime of trying to figure out that you had OCD, and that, because once you label it, once you get the okay of what this is, then you can start treating it. So
Yep.
and it sounds like you were able to find like a good rhythm for yourself between medication and therapy to get to the point that you are at now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it definitely took, it took a while, but, and I played around with a lot of different, variations of medication, and I've had different therapists, and so I would never
Mm-hmm.
recommend. Again, it goes back to the thing, it's hard to give advice to the
Yeah.
OCD community because it is the doubting disorder.
Yep.
So it's kind of crazy to give advice of don't doubt because that's
Right.
counterintuitive. But yeah, just if you know something's not, if it's not working, don't do it. It's that Einstein thing of the insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And
Yes.
it's really hard with anxiety, or with anxiety too. It's really hard
Yeah.
with OCD and anxiety to pin kind of pin down these thoughts that have been keeping you safe, and to just stop them from moving and be like, let's be honest, you're hurting me more than you're helping.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to do, but again, the path forward is just, if it's not working, if you're doing it over and over and getting the same results, then try something else. And
Yep.
everyone's different. That's not, I'm not, again, never recommending medication or ERP, or there's plenty of people out there who, um, they've used things like a band-aid, and I have friends who've
Mm-hmm.
gone to therapy for a short time and really felt they didn't need it, and they seem to be doing fine now. And so I'm never going to tell anyone the perfect, and I don't have it, the perfect prescription of
Sure.
things to put in tandem, but just try different things, and you deserve to not be tormented by your own mind. How good of a relationship can you build with yourself and your own mind before you pass on?
Yeah.
You deserve
Yeah.
that.
I love that, man. I mean, that's does come down to the self. So, I mean, your story, dude, is it's an incredible story of resilience and also creativity, which I love talking to creative people, especially creative people with OCD, because we just get each other. And
Yeah.
there's so much that we can do in this world with our creative brains that can help other people. And I just hope that people who deal with OCD, or really anything that they look at as a hindrance, I hope that they can take that and do something creative with it if they're in a good place to do so, because
Yeah.
there's so much empathy and connection that can come out of that with the right people. I just want to thank you, Justin, man, for coming on here and talking about your story and the OCD blog. I can't wait for more to come from you there. And I'm sure we're going to have you on here again, and we can chat more about things in the future when you get a book out and all that stuff. But this has been great.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. and appreciate the work you do. I know I mentioned this earlier.
Thank
You're one of
you.
the first people I followed, so appreciate you. Yeah, putting yourself out there. Music, art, thoughts. It's
Thank
awesome.
you.
It's
Thank
the
you.
more of us that share, the better. This stuff thrives. OCD thrives in silence
Yep.
and that isolation, and so the more of us that do stuff like this, it's awesome. So I appreciate it.
Awesome, Justin. Well, thanks, brother. And we'll talk soon.
Yes, sir.